Hello and welcome to the Emissaries of the Gospel podcast. My name is Jeremy Brown and I'm your host. And today we're going to talk about Raja Jackson and his incident with the professional wrestler Psycho Stu. But before we do that, if you have not already, please like and subscribe to this channel. And make sure you click on the bell icon for notifications. It helps the channel, but it also helps our evangelistic ministry where Emissaries of the Gospel is pushing back against the darkness through the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, if you don't know who Raja Jackson is, he is the son of retired professional MMA fighter Quinten Rampage Jackson, who was a former UFC light heavyweight champion and also was a big star in Pride when that promotion was running. So he's a fairly successful MMA fighter, and he has, I believe, 4 sons, one of which is Raja. And there was an incident that happened a few days ago with a professional wrestler. It's an indie professional wrestler, so he doesn't work for WWE. And he doesn't work for AEW or TNA or the promotions that have like actual televised programming and deals with ESPN or Netflix or any of that. He's not like a ultra successful, famous star, just like Raja is not a very successful MMA fighter. He's only had one fight in which he has lost, right? So this was at an indie show. And the promotion's co-owned by a former WWE wrestler, and it's unknown to what degree he was involved as far as the reporting of that goes. So when I say that, I mean, was he at the event? Was he aware of things that were going on and stuff like that? That's what I mean by his involvement. Otherwise, there's no evidence that he has any involvement. So anyhow, what happened was one of the indie wrestlers brought his friend Raja Jackson to a show and brought him backstage, which can have the potential to be very problematic, right? So they're backstage, and there's a professional wrestler who he's been working for about 15 to 16 years, who goes by the name Psycho Stu. And he's a former armed forces soldier who has PTSD. And so he says wrestling actually helps him deal with PTSD. And he was backstage. He thought that Raja was part of the show. So if you're not already familiar, professional wrestling is a work. Doesn't mean that everything is completely fake and that nothing hurts or whatever, but it does mean that these are men who are cooperating together to make a performance, and they're trying not to hurt each other, right? They take great lengths in many cases to not hurt each other, including putting their own bodies at risk quite frequently for the sake of the person who is working with them, right? The person who they're actually supposed to be fighting in the storyline, they're actually trying to keep from becoming hurt or injured. So Psycho Stu, he believes that Raja Jackson is kind of in on it, right? He thinks that he's a part of the show. And so they're back there, and he sees him. And even if this is ill-advised, right, it doesn't excuse what happens later. But basically what happens is he goes to a cooler and he grabs a can. It's like a beer can, right? Some people have tried to say bottle. I think that's actually, it's obviously a can. But I think when people say that, either they're too lazy to look into it, and so they're just saying whatever, or they're trying to make it sound worse in order to try to create some sympathy for Raja Jackson and perhaps attempt to justify the unjustifiable, right? But I will give you a little clue. In professional wrestling, even the bottles are rigged, right? So when they smash a bottle over someone's head, 90+% of the time, it's a fake bottle, right? It's not like glass, right? But this was a can. It's an aluminum can. And what happens a lot of times, there's different techniques that they use, but I was involved in professional wrestling. I'm not an expert on everything. I didn't do everything. So but a lot of times they'll put their hand, and you can see Psycho Stu doing this, putting his hand on Raja's forehead, and he goes and he smashes the can essentially on his hand, right? So it doesn't hurt him, and you can see Raja wasn't phased. He didn't flinch. He didn't move, right? Because it didn't hurt. He didn't hurt him. Raja even admitted that he didn't hurt him, right? But what it did hurt was his pride, his precious little snowflake feelings, right? And I'm not going to hold back on this because, you know, there's a certain type of mindset that if we actually love our neighbors, if we love God, if we love our neighbors, if we're actually people who want to see righteousness and goodness and justice flourish, there's a certain type of mindset that we cannot allow to perpetuate, right? We have to say in no uncertain terms that it is wrong, and that, you know, you can't maintain that and be in good standing in our communities. And that mindset is that anybody who insults your pride in any way, right, if there's anything that could, you know, potentially make you look soft, if you don't retaliate tenfold, right, that, you know, they have to take a beating, right? That your pride is worth whatever the cost, right? It could be their life, right? That type of mindset has to be purged. It's not acceptable, right? An insult to your pride is not the same thing as an insult to your life or a threat to your life, right? So saying all that, Psycho Stu hits the beer can basically on his hand, you know. Raja doesn't really move, but he gets angry and he's, you know, cussing. And I'm not going to show a clip of the video. You can go look it up if you want to. It's everywhere on the internet. If you've probably already seen it, you might have already seen it a dozen times. But he gets angry. He's basically saying, I don't play that or whatever. And Psycho Stu is sitting there just before Raja Jackson is going off, and he's saying, you're not going to sell it? Right. So selling it means you act like he hurt you, right? You're going to pretend that you're hurt. You're going to go, oh, you know, or whatever. And so he's confused because he thinks still Raja is part of the show. He hasn't figured it out yet. But as it escalates, the guys that are around there are like, hey, he's not a worker. He's not part of the show, right? He's not in on it. He doesn't know. He's not a worker, right? So Psycho Stu, the character Psycho Stu, immediately apologizes, right? He immediately apologizes to Raja Jackson. He's trying several times, and Raja is refusing it. But finally, Raja, you know, shakes his hand. He accepts it. This is a man trying to humble himself. Hey, it's a mistake. He didn't hurt him. There's no harm there. There's no real foul, right? You can say that it was unwise or whatnot, and sure, I'd agree with you. Raja shouldn't really have been there, but also he should have made sure, Psycho Stu being he, should have made sure that he was part of the show, right? So I can see where the initial confrontation where, you know, there was kind of some mutual fault there, right? So you have this scenario and it's kind of bubbling up, right? And the Psycho Stu character, right, the guy who portrays that character, tries to go and squash it and just say, hey man, I didn't know, I apologize, I'm sorry. You know, goes to shake his hand, didn't mean it, didn't mean anything by it. Didn't do any harm, right? So it's already water under the bridge. If on the instant that he smashed the can there, if Raja Jackson had just, you know, backhanded him, maybe punched him, maybe even knocked him out, you know, one punch knockout or something, you know, you could have sat there and justified that and only that, right? But as the show progresses, so they say, hey, you know, like, why don't we basically make this a part of the show? Why don't you do what they call a run-in, which is where somebody who's not involved in the match runs into the ring to go attack one of the other workers, right? So the idea here is that Raja Jackson, is going to enter the ring and attack Psycho Stu, right? Now, this is a work, right? So it's expected that when you run into the ring that you're working. You're not trying to hurt the person legitimately. You're just going to go and you're going to kind of save face, or you're going to get back, right? There's some wrestlers who work a little stiffer than others. So sometimes, like you can accidentally hurt somebody or whatever. And once in a while, they might intentionally hit them with like a real punch if there's something going on or whatever. Or if there's an agreement to that kind of thing in the back, right? But that's it, right? That is it. You don't try to injure people. You don't try to cripple them. You don't try to kill them. It's not like that. And so the promoter who was there says, hey, why don't you go do this run in? He's like, yeah, if I can do that, then I'll be happy, right? So as things are progressing, you see one of the workers, the one that was Raja Jackson's friend, he is telling him, oh, what do you do? You run in. If he tries anything, I've got your back, right? He's claiming that he's a victim in this because basically everybody's saying he was inciting his friend and so forth, and was partially guilty for even bringing him there in the first place, right? He's not a victim. We'll put it that way. The only thing I will say is it's, to me, so far, it's unclear as to whether or not he thought that was being filmed as part of the show, but it doesn't appear that way. So, but we'll leave that out there as a possibility, right? So Raja Jackson's sitting at ringside and he's working himself up and he's like, when am I going to get to go in? And he's got, I forget the name of the streaming service, but he does streaming and he has subscribers, followers, or whatever that are in real time messaging him and kind of working him up. And they're telling him, basically that he's got to knock him out. And he's saying, if I get, X number of subscribers, I'll knock this guy out. And then he's saying, I'm going to keep hitting him until they drag me off and stuff like that. But he, like, as he's going, you can see he's talking about really hurting him. He's saying, I've always wanted to F up a professional wrestler, right? And everything about what he is saying is that, he's going to go and hurt him, right? And that he's not going to try to stop hurting him. And he's letting other people egging him on, but he's also asking them to egg him on, right? And so what happens is finally he gets his moment. He's getting frustrated and impatient. When am I going to get to go in? So when the Psycho Stu character, who's working his match in the ring, right, when his back is turned, Raja Jackson's told to go do his run-in. A lot of times that happens, but, as far as one wrestler has his back turned and then you come and you're working and you're not trying to hurt him and you just do your run-in, right? But what happens is Raja Jackson picks him up and Psycho Stu gives him his body. So what is happening is they cooperate. So you allow a guy to slam you because you're trusting that he's going to slam you the right way. And that because you've been trained how to land in a certain way, that you usually do not get hurt. Right. That's the whole point. But it looks like, and it has the potential to hurt you. Right. So it's a work, but it's dangerous. And there are some things that you still feel, especially if they have like a stiff ring or whatever, it still can hurt to land, but it's not the same thing as what was about to happen. So Raja, picks him up way over his back. So Psycho Stu is like kind of laid out over his back and he slams him down in such a way that the back of his head smashes the mat. He's clearly unconscious at that point, right? Completely unconscious. So Raja Jackson gets up and he hits him with a punch, right? Now, in MMA, the second a man is knocked out, the ref has the obligation to stop the fight and protect the unconscious fighter because he can't defend himself. Anytime a fighter can't intelligently defend themselves, they have an obligation to immediately stop the fight. They have to protect the fighters. This is very clear. It's been made clear over the last 20 plus years, right? So this is, indisputable, especially someone who is the son of somebody who worked for UFC, right? And they get rid of referees if they don't do that. It's considered a slow stoppage if they get to a second punch, sometimes even to the first one after they're knocked out, right? So just to give you an idea. of this. And in MMA, when a fighter notices that their opponent is unconscious, right, or unable to defend themselves, they typically, unless they're like a really shady, wicked, kind of cruel, heartless, callous character, they will point out to the ref that they need to stop the fight. If the ref hasn't actually seen that, which is troubling, but it can happen, the fighter will usually do that. They do the same thing if they, if they apply a choke and the person's gone unconscious, they will usually let up and just let the person, because if you continue hitting an unconscious man, or if you continue choking someone, obviously you can kill them very easily, possibly very quickly. You can kill them, right? It's very dangerous. And even if you don't kill them, you could cause serious brain damage. You could injure this person in a way that they can't recover for life, right? So it's very dangerous. And I say all that to say, it's possible that when just looking at the way it was transpiring, it's possible that Raja might not have realized he was unconscious when the first punch landed, just seeing the way his head was turned and everything. But he went on to rain about another 21 to 22 punches consecutively, basically just about as hard as he could. They were like serious punches to a completely unconscious man, right? So that's attempted murder right there, right? And basically, the ref who was there, now wrestling refs aren't MMA refs, right? So he didn't presumably know what to do here, but they do have an obligation to protect the wrestlers as well. When they see someone is unconscious, or when they see that they are legitimately hurt, they are supposed to step in. They may give cues and signals to the other wrestler, or even physically stop them, right? But that's their duty, right? This didn't happen. Now, the guy might have been intimidated. He probably was shocked, didn't know what to do, but the referee basically backed right out of the scene and allowed something like 22, 23 unanswered punches to the skull from Raja on this Psycho Stu character. And there was one 17-year-old kid that came in, and he was it looked like a half-hearted effort to pull Raja off. I'm sure he was scared and kind of confused, but he's trying to, this kid was brave. And then finally one of the other wrestlers got out there and pulled him off, and actually put himself in harm's way to get this man off from. And if he didn't, for all we know, Raja could have still been there punching him. Basically, he probably would have until his arms wore out, right? So they pull him off, and the Psycho Stu character, I'm going to wrap up this part pretty quickly so we can get into the scriptures on this, but the Psycho Stu character was choking on his blood and teeth in the ring, right? They're taking a long time, and there was some stupidity done. Like, one of the other guys came in and pinned him, and the referee actually counted the pin and everything. It was like incredibly poor taste, incredibly stupid. And so Raja goes out back afterwards, and he's still he's angry, and he's yelling at people, and trying to pick fights with other people, and he's saying, I ain't playing, all these people are trying to play with me. And he's showing this guy is unhinged, right? This guy has serious self-control issues, obviously, serious anger issues, obviously, violent urges, right? He's taking out whatever it is that's in him on this man, right? Who really didn't do anything. He didn't do anything worthy. He didn't really do anything worthy of violence at all. But being as gracious as I can be to Raja Jackson in his position, at most, what he did deserved maybe one punch to the face or one backhand, right? He didn't do anything that deserved that. That was clearly attempted murder, right? And, if you watch the videos of what led up to it, you can see that he premeditated it. He was intending to do that type of harm, right? So Um, the Psycho Stu character, actually, as he was being brought to the hospital, he was unconscious when he got to the hospital, but he flatlined while they were giving medical care. They had to resuscitate him, or he would be dead now, right? And he finally, as of I think yesterday, or perhaps earlier today, I think it was yesterday though, he finally was able to go home, and he's under care there. He had a number of different fractures, including one that caused him to lose some of his teeth. So if you see a smile, you see like this calf over here. You'll see teeth, and then the other side, you don't see any teeth, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of what happened. So this man, it's unknown to what degree his recovery is going to take, right? But this was clearly attempted murder. So that being said, I'm going to go to the scriptures, and I'm going to read a few things because I've seen all kinds of people online in various forums. I've seen, people who have podcasts, pro wrestlers, Rampage Jackson himself, and a number of other people make comments on this. Some of them, fortunately, praise God, a lot of them seem to, have their wits about them, right? But there are some of them that are very troubling in their logic, and we're going to kind of go over that as we proceed. So in Genesis 9:6, it says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image," right? So God is talking about the sanctity of human life here. And this is saying that it's unacceptable to attack and kill, or attempt to kill, or do violence, like unprovoked violence upon an image bearer of God, right? You just cannot do it. You never are justified in doing that. Now, if somebody, has attacked you and you're defending yourself, or if you're defending perhaps the defenseless, or someone who you're charged to protect, like your wife or your children, or something like that, then yes, appropriate violence can be used in that circumstance to fight off the wicked, violent man. If someone breaks into your house at night and all the lights are off and you can't see what they're going to do, you are permitted to use up to lethal force to defend your home, right? God says that in his word. In a just war, or with a civil magistrate putting to death somebody who has been found guilty after due process of a capital crime, then the sword or lethal force is permitted to be used. But outside of that, you don't have any justifications for force, right? So here's God's prescription for that. He also says in Deuteronomy 5:17, "You shall not murder." You do see that also in Exodus 20, which is the other place where the 10 Commandments are found. If you look at Numbers 35, verses 30 and 31, it says, "If anyone kills a person, the murderer shall be put to death on the evidence of witnesses, but no person shall be put to death on the testimony of one witness. Moreover, you shall accept no ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, but he shall be put to death." Exodus 21:12, "Whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death." Exodus 21:22 to 24, right? So far, what we're seeing here is that it's not optional, right? God is commanding that the righteous penalty for this. It's not jail. It's not a big fine, right? It's death. It's death, right? If you kill someone or attempt to kill someone, and you are found guilty of that, you are to be put to death. Now, yes, you have to have witness. In this particular case, there's no lack of witnesses and evidence, right? So that is basically beyond question right now. I do hold it open, even though I cannot fathom how it could ever be, but I'll leave something out there of a case being able to be constructed if it can be proven that maybe this wasn't malice aforethought, and some things went wrong. But really, I cannot possibly see how one could make that case, considering all of those elements really have already been shown just by the video evidence that we have, right? But I just want to be fair in what I say. Now, if you look at Exodus 21, 22 to 24, this gives, it's kind of framing the issue of life here. So it says, when men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there's no harm, right? So the children are born, but they are well, right? There's no harm there to the children. The one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So, the husband has the right to determine, based on the harm that was done, hey, what is restitution here? And then the judges obviously have to agree that that is reasonable within the confines of God's law, which could be, depending on the nature of the offense, up to 5 times, anywhere from double to 5 times, what it cost them, or what the actual monetary loss was. But it says in verse 23 and 24, but if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So what it's saying there is, if that baby is harmed, if that baby is killed, that means to be put to death, right? And it's unacceptable to do anything less. If there's injury to the child, but they don't die, then there's to be appropriate corporal punishment, right? So this is, how God says that we are to restore and to do justice. Romans 12:9 says, beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So I bring this one up only to say, because this is right before Romans 13, which talks about the sword of the civil magistrate. And I bring this one up because this is, the passage where it's talking about be at peace with all men, so much as it depends on you. The idea of overcoming evil with good, do not repay evil for evil. So if someone offends you, right, if someone hurts your pride, if someone does something that doesn't, like they're not in the process of attempting to kill you or anything, they just do something that makes you angry, they disrespect you or whatever, you don't repay that with evil. You don't try to escalate that. You don't try to hurt or kill them. But even if they have done something that is criminally wrong, right, it is you are still allowed to defend yourself or defend the weak, right? But outside of that, like immediate, imminent threat coming from that person, and so you must defend yourselves. You're not to go and seek vengeance, right? You don't seek your own wrath. You don't seek to become judge, jury, and executioner. You leave that to the wrath of God, which is explained later. God uses the civil magistrates for that purpose here on earth, right? And sometimes the penalty is so severe for their crime that the only type of justice you can do on earth is you must put that person to death and send them, to the higher court, that being God's judgment seat, right? So here's another principle here, and I really, really want to stress this particular one, actually, because this is something we should think about. This is not just a theoretical thing just because it hasn't touched us, right? Directly. This is not just something that we should just be talking about as though it's some kind of out there concept. It's Numbers 35:33. You shall not pollute the land in which you live for blood. This is talking about the unjust shedding of innocent blood. Blood pollutes the land, and no atonement can be made for the land for the blood that is shed in it, except by the blood of the one who shed it. So this isn't talking about individual salvation or anything like that. This isn't talking about Jesus's atonement for your sin, right? What this is talking about is God's judgment on a nation. Like, you cannot, if you think you can go and be unjust and oppressive and commit abomination by acquitting people that that are guilty and justifying them, or by condemning people that are righteous, right? If you're doing those kinds of things, God's judgment is and will be on your land, and it will only escalate until you truly repent and set your heart on what God has said is righteous and just. In fact, in our family devotions this morning, my wife and I and our daughter, we were going over that in Deuteronomy chapter 30. That concept is heavily there, right? And so, anyhow, this defiles the land. So, number one, not to change the subject, but it should make us think very hard about how we react towards abortion, right? There is so much blood already on our hands. We cannot be indifferent to it. We cannot uh, like acquit the guilty. We can't justify the guilty and so forth. So um, that's number one. But we can show that we have allowed that type of unjust thinking to affect our thinking in other areas where innocent blood is shed. And this is a good example of that. And I'll tell you why, because I have to apologize. I didn't check today, but to my knowledge, he being Rajah Jackson, has not been arrested yet and charges filed against him. And it's unthinkable that I hopefully they start acting on that promptly. It's unthinkable to me that there would be no charges filed against him, right? And the civil magistrate here, by the way, they have an obligation, no matter what, to file charges against this man. This is the type of thing where they are obligated to Almighty God as his magistrates, that this type of thing cannot be permitted here. And so this man must face trial. And if found guilty, he must face consequences, right? It's just unacceptable to have anything else, because this pollutes our land. You cannot allow innocent blood to be shed, and you know about it, and you have the evidence to convict the person that's there, and you do nothing. In fact, in ancient Israel, if there was an unsolved murder, one that they couldn't figure out any type of evidence or witness of who did that, they would measure to which of the cities of refuge it was closest to have happened, and then they would sacrifice a heifer there, right? They would, because there had to be some type of acknowledgement and payment and atonement for that blood, and the atonement is sending that person to God to be judged, right? There's a sense where, as far as the land is concerned, and God's mercy or judgment on that land, right? You cannot pile up judgment by allowing injustice. God doesn't wink at injustice. In fact, he tells in Isaiah 1, he tells his people that if you are doing all of your Sabbaths and your new moon festivals and all of these things, right? All of their religious, ceremonies and duties, but you have innocent blood being shed in your land, and you're doing injustice, then he's saying that he doesn't want your false worship, right? That's how he looks at it. You can't sit there. Now, you might be helpless in certain areas, but trying to do things, and I get that. Your worship might be sincere, but you can't be indifferent to it, or you say, oh well, we'll leave that up to the pagans to figure out, or whatever, or it's okay as long as I've got I go to my Sunday service and I have my prayer time in my closet. No, God doesn't want that. If you're sitting there and you don't care about whether or not the civil magistrate does righteousness, and the way for them to do righteousness is to put that person to death if they're a murderer or they attempt murder or some other capital crime, right? So that is actually like our obligation, right? This is something where it's difficult for people, because especially if you're raised up in the 11th commandment type of Christianity, thou shalt be nice and the other 10 don't matter, right? Then you don't understand, because you're conditioned falsely. You're told certain types of lies about God and about the scripture to not see that God isn't looking for you to appear nice and just like squishy and friendly and inoffensive to everybody, but there are certain things where God demands that you be willing to offend them. There's certain things where God says you must be severe, and it's not harsh to put somebody to death for something that God has declared as a capital crime, but it is just, it's righteous, right? And especially murder or attempted murder, right? God even has provisions for, the same thing if you're being negligent or careless, that you'd be guilty of innocent blood. And there's even parameters around if it was an accident, right? How you have to do things. So the whole point of me bringing this up is to say we have obligation to Almighty God towards this. Not only is this clearly a case of attempted murder, right? where it's essentially unimaginable that you could find evidence that would actually prove otherwise, right? But assuming that can't be done, right, and you go through a trial and you demonstrate that, it is our obligation to try that man for attempted murder and put him to death, not just aggravated assault, right? This isn't something where the guy should go to jail for 3 months or 6 months and be out and, okay, my debt to society is paid. No, your debt to Almighty God has not been paid, and it is not just to do that. We are to purge that evil from our midst. Now, I want to read a couple other things. Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. So you have to understand that everything that you do or do not do, especially in civil realm in regards to things that are criminal, things that God says are criminal, things that God says need either corporal or capital punishment. If you don't execute the sentence speedily, right, meaning not he sits in jail and gets 20 years worth of appeals, right, but we're going to cover everything now. We'll allow the defense whatever kind of evidence could be pertinent. And if they can't prove that there's good reason to think this man is or could be innocent, then if it's beyond reasonable doubt, the man is guilty, and we are sending him to face the Lord, right? That's just our obligation. And the Ecclesiastes 8:11 says, if we don't do that, then what happens is we actually train the rest of our society to do evil, right? So the scripture tells us that, having innocent bloodshed in your land begets more innocent bloodshed. If you don't speedily answer that, then it begets more, right? So we see kind of a pattern happening here in the scriptures where you're going to have God's judgment. It pollutes the land. It brings more bloodshed, and it sets the heart of the wicked to do evil, right? So we just have to take that seriously, right? We need to have righteous rulers who understand the law of God, and we need to do away with this foolishness of secularism and pluralism and all of that, and understand that it is God's law that obligates us and it applies, and we need to have righteous judges applying that and carrying out the sentence speedily. Now, I'm going to read a little bit from Deuteronomy 19. This is verses 11 through 13. It says, if anyone hates his neighbor and lies in wait for him and attacks him and strikes him fatally so that he dies, and he flees into one of these cities, this is talking about the cities of refuge, then the elders of his city shall send and take him from there and hand him over to the avenger of blood so that he may die. So this is actually saying here, reiterating that the sanctuary type cities, the cities of refuge, those aren't for people who are guilty of premeditated murder or some type of negligent, careless homicide, right? This is only for manslaughter, where it's truly accidental, right? It says, your eye shall not pity him, but you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from Israel so that it may be well with you. We're not to pity. Our hand is not to spare, right? So this is whether someone has made an intentional false accusation of something that's a capital crime, where they know that the person is innocent of that, but they persist in it anyway. This isn't accidental, like, not having all the facts and pointing to someone as the guilty party because you witnessed them doing something or you witnessed them there, right? This is talking about someone who is knowingly trying to frame someone to die, right? But you have this same principle for anything that's a capital crime, right? Your eye shall not pity them, your hand shall not spare, right? You are obligated to purge the guilt of innocent blood. Deuteronomy 1:17, you shall not be partial in judgment. You shall hear the small and the great alike. You shall not be intimidated by anyone, for the judgment is God's. In the case that is too hard for you, you shall bring to me and I will hear it. Or Leviticus 19:15, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. So here's what I wanted to get at, because this hits a lot of things where we have issues in this particular case, but also culturally. Right. And that is, we can't have partiality. You cannot take action against someone because of what people group that they're in, or who they know or are related to, how much money they have, how powerful they are, any of those things, or not powerful, not having money, not having connections, right? You just can't base your idea of whether or not they're guilty or how you're going to punish them on that. You can't just favor someone because you like them, right? Our obligation is to love God more than we love even our own children. So in the case of Quinten Rampage Jackson, as much, and I do feel bad for him, I feel sympathy for him, because it is hard to have, a child mess up in that kind of way, right? And he's looking at, now realistically in our country, because many states have done away with the death penalty and they're just completely wicked for doing so. His son will probably just go to jail, although he could die in jail, right? But if he does, and they're not completely perverting justice, he would probably go there for a very long time. So essentially, his son, if there's even an attempt to move towards justice and not cover this whole thing up, his son is probably going to be removed from his life as a consequence for his actions for a very long time, if not for the rest of his life, right? So I can feel sympathy for Rampage Jackson for that, but Rampage is obligated to love God more than he loves Raja, right? That's just a fact. That's a hard fact, but that's a fact. And so even Rampage would be obligated to not only acknowledge if his son is guilty, acknowledge his guilt, and that he should be put to death, but Rampage actually should be willing to be among the people who puts him to death. That is how much we are to love God more than anyone else, right? And so, but he is pretty much the only person other than the actual victim, being the man who plays Psycho Stu. He is the only one that I have even a little bit of sympathy for. However, that being said, more often than not, these kind of things are related to the way that you raise your children, how you treat them and talk towards them. And, it's very clear, even on the day of that, in the videos that were shown, that he was, really picking on his son and mocking him. And it seems very clear that his son seems desperate for his dad's affirmation and approval. And it also seems like Rampage knew that his son had some issues before, because he made some comment of, two of his sons, he has, money set aside, I think he said, for college. And then, he's like, one of them, he has money set aside for jail, right? I think we obviously know which one that is. The one who has serious self-control issues. So I'm not saying that Rampage is guilty in the sense that his life should be on the line or anything like that. No, that would be wicked. But the way he raised him, this may be the fruit that has developed from that. Because when we sow rotten seed, we reap rotten fruit. And usually what mom and dad do in moderation, usually their children do to excess. And so if dad has any kind of issues with violence and self-control, issues with, picking on his son or not really loving in him in an appropriate way or whatever. I don't want to be too hard on this particular point, but, if he has issues there, usually what happens is that is reaped. The fruit of that is reaped in spades on the other end. And that's unfortunately how it is. And so even the smallest of our mistakes have the potential to reap devastating repercussions. And so that's something that, I've thought of raising my own daughters. And it's a difficult thing. Now, God is gracious and he's good. And so that doesn't mean that any single mistake means that, your children are destined for prison. But, it's also very clear that when you raise your kids to think a certain way and when you act a certain way towards them, that they turn out a certain way. And even worse is, the absentee father who abandons his children entirely and doesn't even attempt to be a part of their life in any way, shape, or form. Right. All right. So that I wanted to also say, because there's a lot of people arguing right now that, as an example, I'll pick one that's a known kind of public figure, is Mark Henry. He's a former professional wrestler for the WWE. I think he's probably friends with Rikishi, who I mentioned earlier is a co-owner of the promotion that Psycho Stu was working for. Mark Henry, I think he's projecting some of the bullying he experienced in his past, possibly, but whatever it is, he's speaking like an utter fool on the subject. And he's basically saying that the victim, Psycho Stu, is partially guilty because he should have known who he was messing with. Right. I don't care who you are. Right now, I'm not going to say that someone should intentionally provoke someone, but at the same time, that wasn't really the case here. Right. It's an unfortunate misunderstanding, but unfortunate misunderstandings are not to lead to somebody's death. Right. You just can't justify that. Like I said, maybe a backhand or one punch or something. Say, hey, I'm not going to play that. Right. If he had said that and was talking that way, then you could probably, this would be a nothing burger. It might not have even, made the rounds on social media. Would have been considered so non-consequential, right? But you don't get to try to hurt, injure, maim, cripple, or kill somebody because they offended your pride, period. End of story, right? And if you grow up somewhere where you're seen as soft or hard based on whether or not you allow somebody to, you've always got to front to people and you got to project power to them. And, if somebody looks at you sideways, they might be put into the dirt, right? That's wrong. That is the evil that we're to purge from our midst. It's not just another way of thinking, right? It's evil. And we're not just to remove it into another country or another city. We're not just to put it in a cage somewhere. But when it comes to actually trying to kill somebody or actually killing somebody or other capital crimes, you are to put that person to death, period. There is no justification for that at all, right? So when I see people saying stuff like that, I think they're crazy. They're letting their emotions blind them, or they're just plain stupid, right? But no matter what it is, it's wicked, right? And you need to be rebuked and corrected, right? If Mark Henry is a respectable man, and I've seen interviews with him before, and I've never had any kind of disrespect towards him before, but this made me lose basically all respect. If this man is actually worthy of anybody's respect, he should come in and say, you know what, I said something stupid, right? This kid, it doesn't matter. Psycho Stu is not guilty. He's not partially guilty, right? You just don't have a right to do that. You don't have a right to unload on someone in a way that would cripple or kill them just because you're angry because they offended your pride. Because you think that they might not respect you because they disrespected you. Even it might not even be any question. Maybe they did openly disrespect you. Guess what? You don't get to injure and hurt and cripple and kill people because they openly disrespected you. Period. End of story. You don't get to be unhinged, uncontrollably violent, right? It's not okay. However this mindset has crept in, right? It's your obligation as an individual first and foremost, but our ultimate obligation as a society, a culture, a community, to purge that. And if someone is found guilty of letting their actions be driven by that kind of mindset, then we're obligated to purge that person, right? And that's an act of love for not only God, but for neighbor. So I wanted to just kind of go through that and talk about that because I've seen a lot of that. I have seen a lot of people trying to say, "Oh, this is racism." Rampage mentioned that, but there are other people on the internet saying that too, and that kind of thinking has to be purged too. Now, when someone is guilty of that kind of crime, you have to love God more than you love your race, right? I don't care which race it is, right? You are obligated to love God and seek justice before any kind of love for your race, right? Period. And I know this big thing with all the wokesters. It's a big thing with all the critical race theory people. And now it's a big thing with all the kinnists and ethno-nationalists and all that stuff. And every last one of you is wrong if you put race ahead of justice, if you put race ahead of love of God, if you use race to determine whether or not somebody's guilty or the level of punishment they receive, right? That's just not even to enter into your calculus, right? So the people out there that are speaking foolishness about this, because anything related to his race or anything trying to justify that action, it's wrong, right? There's no amount of provocation that can justify murder or attempted murder. There's no amount of insult to your personal pride, none of that. So all that being said, I hope you think on these things and meditate on these things. I hope this episode blessed you, and pray that our nation would turn to Christ, that our hearts would truly turn to God, and pray that our churches would, that the Christians who are in our churches